Hi, this is Adam,
This is Dave,
and you're listening to Fiction.
or nonfiction.
Cue music.
Fiction or nonfiction.
Hey, this is the show where we go through viral news stories, memes, all sorts of information that gets out there and just determines, is it true or is it not? Is it fiction or...
Nonfiction.
Thank you. And me and David, we're back after taking a little bit of a holiday break. We had a pretty good season so far, but we're going forward and we're going to talk about a subject that I think is near and dear to our hearts because we read.
We do.
And not only do we read, we enjoy reading.
Yes.
I believe so. I enjoy reading. I don't know about you.
I like it.
Reading is fun, and, the only thing is, sometimes when you go on a trip, a vacation, you're like, oh, I really want to bring some books with me, and then your suitcase becomes like half a library because there's just so many things you're packing away. So thankfully, due to technology and these advances we now have ebooks.
Wait, you don't bring a separate suitcase of books?
Well, Dave, with me, I actually do.
Oh, okay.
Ebooks have been just such a blessing for people who are traveling a lot to have access to a number of different texts in an accessible format. You can just download and carry hundreds of books with you wherever you go. You can also listen to audiobooks, and it's been a great invention. With that said, though, I'm more familiar with the application than the history of it, which is going to be very good because today you're going to be giving me a history lesson.
Sure am, Adam. I sure am. So my first question...
Why did you have to tussle my hair when you said that?
Anyways, so the very first... We're going to talk about the very beginning of e-booking.
E-booking. Now, for those who are not in the know, I don't imagine there's a lot, but, we should consider the fact that some people may be like, e-book, what is that?
What does it mean? Well, it means electronic book.
An electronic book. So essentially, it means any book that is not a physical paper-bound book, but something you would access electronically on a screen, if I'm not mistaken. That's the full definition.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And we're here to discuss when they were first invented and also when they started becoming more widely used. Mm-hmm. So my first question to you...
I'm going to answer.
Okay.
Nonfiction, ebooks exist.
That's not my question.
Oh, okay.
My question is, I'm going to ask you which of these dates is the correct answer, which is fiction, which is nonfiction. So ebooks were first invented in 1987, and the first book was available on a floppy disk. Is that fiction or nonfiction?
I believe that happens to be nonfiction.
What?
It's true.
Okay.
It's the whole concept of the show.
Partially true, Adam.
Partially.
While that fact is true, in 1987 there was an ebook available on a floppy disk. They actually go back to the 1970s.
Interesting. Now, being on a floppy disk, I imagine it was probably just like 50 pages worth because that was like the maximum storage capacity at the time.
Right. Well, what they were doing at Eastgate Systems, which is a company that was known for creating computer games, they published a hypertext fiction book called Afternoon, which was a story by Michael Joyce, and this book was available on floppy disk in 1987. So that's part of that was actually an early version of how you can access an ebook. The original ebooks, we're going to actually go even further back, but the first and the most common information about this is they were started in 1971, and they were started for Project Gutenberg. Do you know what Project Gutenberg is?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
Okay, yes. So Project Gutenberg, for those who are not in the know, it's basically a type of curation of text and materials that fall outside of copyright limitations. So it's an idea of preserving text and making them publicly available. The contemporary iteration of it is a website, Project Gutenberg, where you can access easily and get hundreds, if not thousands, of texts that are free and available. And it's perfectly legal because all fall outside of copyright limitations.
Yes, and that's the current iteration. But when it was originally started, there were no ebooks. So the whole purpose of this was just to establish an electronic library. And this was done in 1971 by Michael Hart, the University of Illinois. And like his main goal was to have an electronic public library of 10,000 books. It was a non-for-profit idea, So basically, people could access these books electronically.
Oh, interesting.
And he saw e-publishing as a tool for education in the future, reaching more people, to reach more people without the limitations of the physical medium.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically why it was first started. I should mention, we always have to let people know information literacy is important. Where are you getting your information from? Are your facts reliable? Yes, you should make sure. I pulled this from an article that actually goes back to 2002 from The Guardian.
Oh,
And
okay.
The Guardian is a well-known publication. They back up their facts. And there's sources here for this article. But let's see. There's also a very interesting timeline for how books became more accessible. Yes, they started this thing. What's interesting is how it got started. How did this Michael Hart guy start doing these ebooks at the University of Illinois? Well, he was given unlimited computer time on a huge mainframe computer from Xerox.
And when we say huge, like they were the size of buildings
And
at
room,
that point.
yeah, and this
Just
was,
imagine the size of the mouse for that. It must have been the size of a car.
Yes, well, this was in the Materials Research Lab of the University of Illinois, and it was probably best known because Michael Hart's best friend at the time was one of its operators. So
Nepotism.
I guess, but what might seem like a boring internet story was not. He kind of was trying to get these books electronically, and then you could share them with the computer. So it also kind of ties in with the internet.
That makes sense because the development of it for sharing information across institutions was really coming to a head at that point.
Yeah, and they used something to share data and data processing. It was called ARPANET. And that goes, we talked about the internet before many episodes ago, I think. And that's just like an early, like, interconnected network where you can share information.
Yeah, basically it was a closed hub of networks rather than what we're familiar with the internet now, where we have open access for the most part, the public really accessing these sites. It was limited access to a set number of networks. Primarily it was used by educational institutions and military institutions at that point.
And so they had all this technology there, and basically it was sitting there, and he had this idea. It wasn't really being used as much as we use computers now. People walk around with computers in their pockets with cell phones and smartphones.
Oh, I thought you meant like an old IBM. It's like, wow.
Well, I do, but I can't talk about that.
I was going to say, your pocket's huge.
But apparently the value of this data processing and everything he was working on these machines, he later calculated to be around, well, there's a lot of zeros in this number. You want to read that number?
That is 100 million.
Yeah. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's like 70s style money, right?
That the 70s, 100 million, that's like a couple billion now, I think.
And I'm going to provide a little bit of backstory on how he actually shared the first ebooks at this time. So,
A floppy disk.
no.
An 8-track.
This was in 71.
Oh.
So, he was given a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And
well, he should have memorized that by that point.
he got this at a grocery store leading up to the fireworks on July 4th. And he was kind of inspired. He can make good use of his computer time if he typed this into text, and then he sent out a message so people could access this. So he kind of proposed this idea, and 6 people took him up on the offer, and 6 people downloaded the text. Look at that. The world's first ebook was born.
With 6 whole people.
With the Declaration of Independence.
The Declaration of the what now?
Independence? Declaration of Independence.
But that is pretty incredible to think that was considered an incredible number of users for that text at that point. Because, again, we need to re-emphasize the fact, limited access to the technology that allowed you to actually read or download these said materials. Because unlike now, where hundreds of thousands of people are online, at that point, you had an elite group of people who had access to the technology.
Right. And what's also interesting is, like, when he typed this in the computer, it was all in capitals. There was no lowercase option at the time.
Oh.
So he was shouting the Declaration of Independence.
So he
literally.
was the first
Caps lock?
Yeah, he was the first caps lock texter. So obviously a precedent for my mom.
Man.
Yes, I'll come over, Mom. You don't have to yell at me. I don't mean that.
So from this, he kind of got the idea, well, the Declaration of Independence is a universal text in the U.S. and everyone has access to it. What other things can we do that are kind of in the public domain in that sense, that people should have access to and don't necessarily always read.
Mm-hmm.
So then he got the idea of, well, let's do the Bill of Rights. Let's do the American Constitution, the Bible. And he kind of went from there, typing these things. The idea was not just using computers to crunch numbers, but to deal with data and to get computers to sharing text and literature. And this, at the time, was a radically different idea, I think, especially in the 70s, because everyone's like, oh, that's a computer. You do calculations and math stuff. You know?
And that's essentially what it was. It was for very complex mathematics and equations that really would take a lot of human minds, an exorbitant amount of time to come to the conclusion of, and that was the use of these machines. So here, using it for a literary purpose is pretty much, I guess that is the precedent for it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And also, it's really interesting, how do people come up with these ideas? And sometimes it's random. You're at the grocery store, you're in America, and, you know, Independence Day is coming up, 4th of July, and you go like, you know what, let's invent electronic books. So
Yeah, I have those thoughts all the time when I'm at the grocery store.
I know. So I'm also going to I'm getting some of this background information from this really cool article I found online that was published actually in 2024 by James Hardy for the History Cooperative. And this is a website, and there's a lot of sources here that is backing up this information. historycooperative.org if you're interested. There's a lot of information on there about all different things. But that's where I'm getting some of this background from. So basically from there, ebooks started, and then they eventually would start catching on. But how would they catch on? That's what I think is kind of interesting here.
Okay.
Like, how did they become like they are today? Like, anyone can access a book from their library. If you have a library card, you can also purchase them. You can download them. But there was a time when you couldn't publicly do that. There was a time when libraries didn't have ebooks, that you couldn't access them for free. So how did it get from that antiquated big computer technology to being available in libraries and things like that?
Yeah, to make it more publicly known, because as you were saying, for the longest time, it was people who had access to the technology. It was very prohibited. And definitely, I think before you mention this, I'm going to take a prediction. The home PC was probably what brought it into greater attention.
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting is video games and computers and the development of that technology becoming more of a personal computer that you can access at home.
Yeah.
I guess the whole idea, going back to something I learned many years ago in history, is the idea of luxury time. What do you do in your free time when you're not working, right? So this is just taking that idea from the past and putting it in at the time what was present. And one of the first ideas where books became more available with games was that 1987 idea. They developed that story on the floppy disk. But from there, in 1990, an ebook display program was created called PC Book. And this was created by John Galuska, who is the founder of Serendipity Systems. So it kind of is tying in with this whole, video game thing. And he made a PC book and the PCs. It's interesting because this also ties in with the development of the internet as it became went past dial-up. But from there, in 92, DOS created ebooks converted for Windows.
It's really interesting, too, because around this time, DOS-based video games incorporated a lot of text. And I think for common gamers who are maybe used to shooter games or platformers, they may not realize some of the original video games were not these arcade-style games, but were, in fact, more, what can we say, stuff like adventure games, things that were very text-based, where you had to type in commands.
Yeah, you had to type in the code in DOS to get the game to work, put in the disk.
And then to navigate through, let's say, a puzzle maze, you would have to type in a command for a character to lift something or open a door, and you had to be very precise with the keystrokes because there was a limited number of commands that you could actually give to progress the game. So already you kind of have a textual story being told, not necessarily one meant straight as a narrative to be read. There is an interactive element, but with that said, it's the first time, I think, on a commercial level, reading text directly from the screen is the primary focus of this luxury pastime.
Right. That's right. And I'm just going to run down a brief outline going up to the early 2000s on how ebooks became popular. We'll talk about how libraries integrated it later. But in 1993, there was a website launched called Bibliobytes. Now, I'm not sure if they're still in existence.
Sometimes late at night when I don't have a bag of chips, I'm just like, I could go for a bibliobite right about now.
Oh yeah, it's tasty.
Mm-hmm.
So this was created in '93 for the internet, and the internet was still in its very early, developing phases.
Maybe not its infancy, but more like its adolescence, perhaps.
Yeah, it was a rebellious teenager. So
that explains all those Angel Fire websites.
Oh man, yeah, and all those dancing baby gifs. They weren't called gifs then. What were they?
They're GIFs.
Oh wow. So anyways, Bibliobytes created this website to sell ebooks over the internet, and they were the first company to do it for financial gain. And they also created a financial exchange system because you were buying them off the internet.
Okay.
Which at that time, now you can go on Amazon or any website and purchase anything with your credit card. But back then, that wasn't something people were doing. It was still a new thing. And then in '94, the development of HTML for websites, which drastically changed the way websites look, adopted itself for ebooks, and someone named Roy Hoy launched a publishing company called The Fiction Works, which was specifically made to produce ebooks in this format.
I see.
And then from there, it kind of developed even more. In '98, this is when things started kind of really catching on. Neuromedia released the first handheld ebook reader, which was called the Rocket.
Ah.
And I guess this is like an early version of a Kindle or one of those ebook readers that you can purchase.
It probably had a Game Boy screen, I imagine.
It probably did.
You had to change the green tint on it.
So basically, this allowed you to get ebooks that were downloaded from your PC via a serial cable. Now, this is like an ancient cable you would plug into your computer to download it. I'm sure it probably took days to download books.
Oh, children, you do not know what this cable was like. It was as thick as an anaconda and just as unwieldy.
And then there was another reader. It was called the Softbook Reader. This was similar to the Rocket and similar to the ebook readers we have today, but like a very early, I guess, archaic version, but it was 1998. So I don't know how archaic it was. It might have been the size of a house. I'm not sure. But it had a leather cover, and it was a telephone-based catalog ordering system.
I'm just trying to imagine something the size of a house covered in leather.
Yeah, that would be quite something. Excuse me. But anyways.
Thank you for that horrifying visual image.
So this was different because it was a telephone-based catalog that was used as an ordering system that could carry 100,000 pages of content, including text, graphics, and pictures.
Ah.
So you can see how things were developing here, along with the internet and the HTML. In 1999, this is when it really kind of started taking off, because American publisher Simon & Schuster created their first new imprint, iBooks, which was the first trade publisher to simultaneously publish books as ebooks and physical books. And this featured popular authors like Irving Wallace, Raymond Chandler, Arthur C. Clarke, and then it kind of got tied in with the Oxford University Press around this time, and they created their own internet library. So it just kept developing from there. In 2000, and there was something else that happened in '99.
Napster, that's got to be it.
Yeah, we downloaded books illegally. But this is kind of built from the Project Gutenberg, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology had a conference, an ebook conference, to kind of let people know what is this and what's going on, because some people were probably like, what is an ebook? Why do I want to read an electronic book? Stuff like that.
Yes.
In January of 2000, the first free software was made available for a PC to read ebooks. It was called the Glassbook, and it was a reader you could get on your PC to read ebooks, and it was free. You didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah, the problem was the pages were just transparent, so you couldn't actually see anything on it.
Do you know what the very first ebook that was published exclusively on the internet was?
Now...
This occurred in March of 2000.
So my question is, for clarification, is this something that would later go on to a print edition?
I think it is available as an actual book now. I'm not 100% sure on it.
Okay, so I know at this time, and I'm going to do a little bit of a preamble, there were such things as hypertext novels.
Yes.
So hypertext, for those who don't know the terminology, that's the link that you click on any web page that redirects you to another site or another page. And what would happen is hypertext novels would often not only get you to click a link to go to the next page of the novel, but you could actually traverse to different links. You could go to other websites, or you could potentially click on various hypertext links within the web page to kind of get a unique reading experience rather than just a linear one of you go to page 2, then 3, then 4. This could take you to page 2, you click a link, you go to page 43, you click a link, you go back to page 3, etc. With this said, I do know there was a very famous novel that was later printed in a physical edition, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. And I know that was a very popular one that was around the time. I don't know if it was the first, but I'm going to go with that.
Okay, so we're going to say, I'm going to give you two options. You tell me which one is fiction or nonfiction. So it was either Daniel or it was Stephen King.
Well, I'm going to say because you got his name wrong, it's probably Stephen King.
I got his name wrong?
Danielewski.
Oh, Danielewski. Well, I guess I gave myself away there. It was Stephen King. In March of 2000, his novel Bag of Bones was published exclusively on the net for you to use on your Glassbook e-reader.
Oh, so it was probably a promotional thing for the company to say, buy our product because this is the only way you'll be able to access this Stephen King novel.
And what's amazing is, well, I guess it's not that shocking. It sold a lot. But users could download the book for $2.50 to read on their computers. And it sold 500,000 copies in 48 hours.
Dang.
This is, as one publisher commented at the time, he's done more for e-publishing in 1 week that it might have taken us years to accomplish.
Certainly in a commercial standpoint, I don't disagree with that.
So from there, more interest started developing because people are like, well, the only place I can get this is if I get this and if I have a PC, etc. So it kind of started this interest in general boom. And from there, it just kept developing more. Microsoft developed its own e-reader. Microsoft and Amazon, early Amazon joined forces to sell ebooks. So they had an online bookstore. They would also let people download ebooks so they could get it on their PC and handheld devices. And this was kind of an early beginning of, well, Amazon was still a newer company at the time, so they weren't really as popular as they are now and as successful yet.
No, they were more, not a brick and mortar store exactly, but they were a warehouse distributor of books exclusively. And that's something that a lot of people, I think,
They forget,
don't understand, or maybe they never learned or forgot about.
They started as a bookseller.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then because they had these exclusivity deals with certain publishers and certain other companies, they blew up into this monolith that now sells everything. It is just this like gestalt now that is, I would argue, too powerful. But, at the time, they were one of those forces that drove the market for ebooks and made it as much a popular form of narrative consumption as anything else.
Yeah, and from there, more things started developing. Like there was more like conferences and awards and more public awareness being made of these ebooks. And then, different companies would start developing different versions of e-readers. And it would go on from there. But what's interesting is in 2001, Adobe became more of a presence in the e-world because they launched their ebook reader, which was an updated version of Glassbook. So basically, they kind of took over. And it kind of developed from there. Random House got involved. HarperCollins got involved. Time Warner got involved. Penguin. And it just kind of went and snowballed from there.
And there was exclusivity deals that happened because what I think a lot of people who may not be aware of this don't realize is that you have certain limitations in terms of the software and what publishers will release ebooks as.
Yeah.
So, now we're seeing a more diverse market because for a while, everything was basically a monopoly by Adobe. But then Amazon came out with the Kindle. There was a lot of threats, I think, to a lot of publishers realizing that because Amazon was such a force for physical book distribution, they could lose a market if they were seen as perhaps compromising their ability to give ebook rights and distribution to them. So there was software developed for the Kindle product that was from Amazon, as well as what would be traditional Adobe compatible devices.
Right.
And so there we saw this breadth of different formats of ebooks come out.
And the beginning of, do you have the right update? And do you have the right software? Do you have the right compatibility? Because there's different companies starting to compete, right? And that's another story. But this is how it went from that very early primitive version done at universities, purely just for interest to see if it could be done and shared, to that. But also within that timeline, we should mention libraries became involved. Libraries started making ebooks available for free, and you could download these and access them. But when was that?
I'm going to say 2003.
Is that because you have the paper in front of you?
That's
with
the only
information?
reason I know that, yes.
Yes. So, yeah. So if you want to maybe mention a bit about that.
Well, in 2003, I guess libraries started offering some popular fiction and nonfiction ebooks to the public, and they basically heralded ebook lending. And this was mainly helmed by American
Right.
public libraries with stuff that fell outside of copyright at that point. However, libraries, seeing that there was a growth of demand for this format, they had to start looking at working with other companies in order to get popular fiction and popular nonfiction distributed, because a lot of stuff was held off with distribution rights. And so basically at that point, there was this sort of collaboration between the Public Library Funding and Technology Access Study that was conducted by the American Library Association and a number of different companies. And basically what happened was this led to the establishment of content curators and distributors for public libraries and application software. The big ones that we certainly use here at Windsor Public Library being Hoopla.
Yeah.
We had used a service called Overdrive, which was kind of the primary service to use for basically a decade, because it worked with exclusive Adobe software.
Right. Yeah. And we should mention anyone can access e-resources, not just e-books, from the library with your card, whether it's an e-card or an actual physical card. You have access to all these with Cloud Library, Hoopla, and there's also audiobook options as well.
Now, here's something that I want to ask, because I think a lot of people, they say certain things about the kind of ubiquity of information access online, and we have to discuss this because, again, this is about information literacy.
Yeah.
I've heard people say, well, I don't need to buy books anymore from a store because I can get anything online. I can download any book from the internet.
That is not correct. I'm sure you could find, if it's a popular book, you can find it, most likely. But sometimes you need something specific. You need a certain edition. You need something like this. You need something for school. Those aren't available. It's just sometimes you have to get the actual book. And another thing is, with technology, as we learn, yes, there's so much you can access, not just books, but music, everything, with streaming now. But not everything's always there, and they take stuff away. And then sometimes you lose information. So if everything was only ebooks and there was some sort of horrible internet crash and someone went by the mainframe of where internet is stored with a giant magnet, we'd lose we'd lose everything.
Talking like a Wile E. Coyote
Yeah,
flying
yeah.
by in a helicopter.
I was thinking about Looney Tunes. So like, if someone went by the main internet, where I don't know where the main internet is stored, but if you went there with some giant magnets, we could lose the whole internet, you know? So I don't know. Don't quote me on that.
Oh, I'm quoting you on that.
But like, that's kind of how it got started. And if you think about it, if 2003 is when they first started offering titles in libraries, that's not super long time ago. It's not like it is over 20 years ago, but it's not that long ago. It's not that long ago.
Well, I'm going to talk about one of these controversies that did happen a while ago, because I think this is interesting. When you download a book for your e-reader, do you own that book?
No.
That's correct. So basically, I want to set the record straight, because I think a lot of people conflate the traditional economic models of buying books from a brick and mortar store, a physical book, with what happens with ebooks.
Yeah.
And that's not true. You basically buy a license right to read the book. But if the licenses elapse, then that means technically the vendor of said book can remove it and remove your access from it. Now, people may be scratching their head going, well, what do you mean by that? What's an example? A very famous example happened back in the summer of 2009 when Amazon deleted from Kindle 1984 by George Orwell.
Funny choice to delete.
It couldn't have been a more ironically delicious title that had this happen, but I don't even believe it was due to copyright elapsing or anything else. I think it was just some sort of glitch in the system, but it ended with basically everyone who had downloaded 1984 for their Kindle, they lost access to it.
Yeah.
That's an example of an incongruity that can happen where you lose the right to access something because, again, you're not purchasing the physical item, or you're not purchasing it forever. You're purchasing a limited right to have it.
Right. Yeah. And that can happen, and it has happened in more cases than just that. I'm sure it's happened many times where it's like, I had this, downloaded this file, and now I don't have access anymore. They deleted it. They removed it from the system. Same with, I guess, streaming. It's like, oh, I put this on my watch list. I'm going to be watching these movies later.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go back maybe a couple of weeks, and you're like, oh, they took it off. It's not there anymore, and I can't access it. So it's similar.
So some people wonder about that for streaming services. Why do I have things on Netflix or for our library, let's say like Hoopla or Canopy, that says, we'll be leaving soon, please check out? Why isn't it just up there forever? Well, the answer is
Money.
Well, it is money. It's multifaceted because there are certain ideas out there, certain discourse that this is an artificial end of term to create a scarcity mindset to get people to stream stuff as soon as they see it, to inflate numbers of views on these services. But there is also a very tangible answer, which is the fact that there are limited distribution rights that the rights holders of films, for example, have an agreement with distribution companies. So let's just use one of our library's favorite services, Canopy.
Mm-hmm.
Canopy will basically buy a license to share a film on its platform for a certain amount of time. Yeah, exactly. And with that said, once that elapses, they no longer have the right to it, so it must be taken down.
Unless they reestablish that.
Exactly.
And add it back.
They can extend the contract, or maybe they can write up a new one, but either way, it is a limited term. So it's not exclusive to films. The same thing happens with distribution rights for books. Famous authors who are currently alive, whose works fall within copyright law, they license out the right for companies to release their books digitally, just like they license out the right for companies to publish physical editions of their books. So that's why inevitably you'll have certain imprints that will stop publishing a physical book, and it will go to maybe a legacy imprint like Penguin's books, for example, because Penguin has either secured the rights for it, or the rights for printing and distribution have elapsed and they've decided to purchase it. The same thing happens online. So what will happen even more so at a more rapid rate, you'll have a popular author, they'll have a certain limited time where they agree for their publishing company to have a book distributed online, and then that elapses. And some people wonder, why can't I find every single, Janet Ivanovich book online on your library resource? Well, it's not because we don't necessarily want to have it.
It kind of falls out of the copyright and the distribution deals that were set up initially.
Exactly. So this is part of, I think, an answer to that question I posed. There is a myth that you can access anything online. It's up to the copyright holder to allow it to be distributed online. It's up to the copyright holder to sign licensing deals to decide who distributes it. And then there are even cases where particular books have been held back from publication online because the author did not want that form of distribution.
Yeah, and this also goes with music streaming, and there's a whole another thing we could talk about with that, and the rights to that, and how people are paid and not paid properly. But it's a similar thing, and not everything is available on the most popular streaming services. Most of the stuff is there because that's how people access things, so people want them to be available, but it's not always there. And sometimes there's nothing as good as the real thing. Sometimes you need that real book, sometimes you need that digital video disc, and sometimes you need that whatever music format you prefer.
That laser disc.
Oh, yeah.
So I got a question for you then, Dave. We've talked about the scarcity of materials online, that not everything is going to be published there. That's a myth. Is everything published online available physically?
That's also not true.
Now,
some stuff is just available digitally.
And why is that?
To confuse everyone. No, because there's different publishing rules. Maybe people, if they're an independent author, maybe for them it's more feasible to publish digitally because more people can reach it, as opposed to them getting books published and printed, and they don't have an actual distributor. It might be harder for them to sell and move their books.
That's true, and sometimes it's for purely promotional reasons. Because you brought up that Stephen King novel. Now, I do believe there was a print edition that later came out.
I think so. We'd have to check that. But that's how it was. How would we check that?
Well, you can go to windsorpubliclibrary.com and check our catalog, of course.
Or You can go on the internet.
Or the internet, I guess, if you want to. It's still the internet, Dave. What are you talking about? Anyway, I want to talk about cases where there are actually exclusive deals to have books published online in no other format, because there was this drove of YA authors at one point that were releasing stuff. You know, the halcyon days of the YA boom, where Maze Runner, where all these other stories became very popular, and all these series just blew up. Well, what inevitably happened was people wanted more content, and the publishers wanted more content, but they also wanted something cost efficient. So they asked authors, why don't you write short novellas or just little chapters that are exclusively purchasable online?
Ironically, very similar to what literary magazines do.
Exactly.
And, continue.
Well, end of anecdote is simply that we have encountered many patrons who are frustrated because they've heard there's this new short novel by whomever, and they want access to it, but they can't get it. There is no print version of it. It's not published in any physical format. It is exclusively online, and that makes some people who are reticent to delve into ebooks very frustrated. So that's one example. The next one I'm going to give you of the reality of exclusively online material is stuff that cannot be printed.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say that, what do you imagine is something that's incapable of being printed?
I don't know. Like something that's very, like there would be just too many pages.
Okay, that is one idea. How about this little story? I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it. 17776.
No.
It's also known as What Football Will Look Like in the Future. This is a multimedia fictional story that's written by John Boyes, and it was published entirely online through SB Nation. So basically at this point, they wanted to curate a bunch of writers to compose essays and fiction about what they thought football would look like in the far distant future. And what Boyes did was something unconventional. He decided instead of just writing about football and coming up with ideas of how the sport would change, he's going to write this utopian narrative about 10,000 years in the future, where human beings have evolved to the point where they are very conceptually unlike us anymore, and that all humans have become immortal and infertile. And the series follows 3 sapient space probes that watch humanity play an evolved form of American football. It is a great satire, a hilarious read, honestly one of the best pieces of short fiction I've ever read. And it was produced not only with text, but with GIF images. As it's multimedia, you would see video images, you would see different types of stuff that could only be done through a website.
Well then, I guess he kind of took the format and worked with it in an unconventional way.
Absolutely. This is one of those things where I do always recommend people check it out. You can find it online. Again, it's published by SB Nation. And this story, in addition to being unconventional and one of the most creative uses of the format of a hypertext webpage, it won a National Magazine Award for Digital Innovation and was longlisted for both the Hugo Best Novella and Best Graphic Story Awards back in 2018.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So, as we've talked about certain things in the past that have kind of been around, like books, remember we talked about the invention of the light bulb and electricity, how it became more conventional in homes, and how it was disputed who actually invented certain things.
It's a little dim, but I think
Ha!
I can see the light.
You are a comedian. I forgot the word a comedian. You are a comedian.
You speak good word.
I word good. So this is also true of ebooks. There's also some disputes to when the actual first idea of an ebook was and when the first ebook reading machine was developed.
Ah, okay.
So my question to you is, I'm going to ask you if this is fiction or nonfiction. I'm going to give you a few examples that we have here. The first reading machine idea was first developed in either 1946 or 1930.
I'm going to say as early as possible, 1930.
You are correct.
Okay.
So the very first concept of reading an ebook came with the development of the first talkie movie. And if anyone knows what that is, it's when people actually started talking in movies and there was no more silent films. They started actually talking.
Yeah, they had audio playback for text. So basically what every movie is now, that you could actually hear dialogue.
Someone named Bob Brown in 1930 had this idea called the readies, like the talkies. And his idea was to have the talkie, but as a book. So he thought that movies have outmaneuvered books by creating the talkies, so what we should do is find a new medium for reading. His idea was to have a simple reading machine that you can carry or move around and attach to any old electric plug and read 100,000 word novels in 10 minutes if I want to. So it's kind of a little bit different. But that was his initial idea. I won't go into too much detail, but that's kind of...
It was obviously steam powered. It had giant gears next to it. Okay.
So like... This is kind of how it started. The initial ideas kind of started this way. And he did kind of try to develop something, but nothing really kind of materialized on a more mainstream way. But then the inventor of the first e-book is not widely agreed upon. There's other examples. From 1946 to 1970, the first e-book, some people say, may be called the Index Thomisticus. And this was a heavily annotated electronic index of the works of Thomas Aquinas. And it was prepared by Roberto Busa, and this began in 1946, completed in the 70s. So that's another one, and it kind of tied in with CD-ROMs in the late 80s. But then there was another example in 1949 with Angela Ruiz Robels. She was a teacher in Spain, and she patented what was called the Encyclopedia Mechanica. And I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it roughly translates to the mechanical encyclopedia. And her idea was to have a mechanical device which used compressed air where text and graphics were contained on spools. Users would have to load them on spindles.
Oh, interesting.
And her idea was to create a device that would decrease the number of books that her pupils carried in school. And the final device would include audio recordings, magnifying glasses, a calculator, and electric light for night reading. So her device was never put into production, but there was a prototype, and you can find it on display at the National Museum of Science and Technology.
I just want to say, her conception of it seems a lot like a smartphone.
It's interesting how these things develop and take place. And then there was another example in the 60s. Some people say it started in the 60s with the NLS project, which was done and headed by Douglas Engelbart and the Stanford Research Institute. And basically, this is a hypertext thing. So it was projects that were done and headed by Andries Van Brown at Brown University, and these were different type of documents that ran on IBM mainframes. And I won't get into too much technical information about this, but...
Oh, please do. I would love that.
You want more technical information? The FRESS was used for reading extensive primary texts online. And this was also used for annotation and online discussions in several courses at university. This also included English poetry and biochemistry, and this kind of tied in with teaching and education in the universities. And so many people argue that maybe that was one of the first ebook developments. So there's a lot of different things, and it ties into many other technologies and different ideas.
And I know someone's going to say this, and let's just put it out there. Yes, we know there are also e-audiobooks, and I think for the point of this episode, we're just looking at stuff that replicates textual information that can be read. Like, yes, you could argue old cylinder recordings were technically the first ebook because they had recorded text and narratives on them, but we're just looking at what could replicate readable text on it, not just something that you could listen back to.
Yeah, tying in with computers and the development of the internet.
Yeah.
So I guess we could leave it at that for now. I also wanted to just wrap it up with one more thing we should mention. All this stuff that developed up to today, when you're currently listening, ebooks have changed the way people read and have changed the way that people talk about reading. So a lot of things have changed because if you can access it on your device or your computer, you can just read it instantaneously. You don't have to wait for a book. You don't have to flip pages. It changes the way people comprehend and digest this information. This can also be said of using anything on the internet.
And then I also go back to stories like House of Leaves or 17776, where there are unique things that can be done by incorporating ebook technology into a narrative and having a narrative told through that for the exclusive abilities of that medium. So there's a lot to go on. I do want to say, though, David, if people are looking for new resources for ebooks and they haven't discovered it yet, we've already mentioned it, but Windsor Public Library has a large range of ebook collections that you can access. We have Cloud Library, Hoopla, and we have some other services as well. We have digital magazines, and it can all be accessed on our website, windsorpubliclibrary.com.
It's all free.
It's all free. You just need to have a library membership, so you can go into any branch to get one. You can also, if you have something that's prohibiting you from being able to enter into a physical library, you can also access an e-card that allows access to all of our online resources. So you just have to email us at customerservice@windsorpubliclibrary.com for that. And if you're someone who's new to ebooks, who's thinking maybe you want to start but you've never really given them a chance before, definitely go into your local branch of Windsor Public Library, talk to a staff member, see if they can set some time aside to kind of walk you through, to introduce you to the idea of how to use an ebook, and it might change your life and your reading habits.
Yeah, and you know what? That was just a little bit of history, kind of connecting something a lot of people do every day. You read on your phone. And this is we've kind of traced it to the beginnings. Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned, there's a lot of back and forth as to who actually invented it. It's all quite fascinating. But that's what I decided to bring to the table here, or should I say the digital table.
Is there a digital table? I don't know.
No, there is a physical table in front of us.
Well, there is a physical one,
but people,
that's for sure.
People can't see that.
Well, with that said, David, I want to thank you for bringing this information to the forefront. I think we've actually been able to examine and debunk a lot of myths and misconceptions around the use of ebooks and the distribution of electronic text online. So, again, if you have any questions about ebooks, go into your local branch of Windsor Public Library or give us an email at customerservice@windsorpubliclibrary.com. With that said, David, I think we're done the episode.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's time for a random day fact this time.
Well, you know what? Maybe we'll make it up next time with some extra facts. But,
right.
Go online, try out an ebook. Let us know what your favorite ebooks are as well. Give us, of course, a response on social media. We post these episodes both on YouTube and on Spotify, and we'd love to hear your comments about the show. Until next time, though, this has been Adam.
Dave.
And you've been listening to Fiction.
Or Nonfiction.